books. I'm so excited. I think I have so many books that it's going to take me into the month of March, and I have no problem with that. I've split up the books so that I can talk about them in categories. So for example, I got a graphic novel, I'm going to talk about that. I got some historical fiction novels, I'm going to talk about those together. And without further ado, let's get started. The first book given to me is a book that I mentioned in a previous video. I think I mentioned it in my Books to Gift for Christmas guide, and that is Monstress by Marjorie Liu. And if you watched my Books to Gift for Christmas, you would have seen that it was on my list of books that I wanted to receive this Christmas, and I'm so happy to get it. I read the first 2 or 3 editions, and so I'm happy to be able to reread those as well as finish out the 8 that round off the entire volume. This book follows a non-human girl named Macrae as she unravels her past, finds out about her mother, and discovers that she has a psychic connection with an otherworldly being, and it happens all during the backdrop of a war between humans and non-humans. The second set of books that I was given this Christmas are YA novels. The first one is Double Teenage by Joni Murphy, and this book seems to be extremely complicated. As far as I can tell, we follow 2 teenage girls, Celine and Julie, and they both come from the same town in New Mexico on the border between the USA and Mexico. And the city that is closest to them on the Mexican side is the city Juarez, which is the city that was and is notorious in the news because of the amount of female homicides that happened there. This book also seems to deal with a lot of what's going on in the world politically. There seems to be an element of this book that discusses NAFTA, so I'm really interested to see what it's going to yield. My Name is Leon by Kit de Waal is my second YA book that I got, and the reason that I'm interested in this book is because the writer Kit de Waal has roots in what she discusses in this book. Kit de Waal previously worked in criminal justice, specifically criminal justice as it relates to younger children and foster care. And the book, My Name is Leon, is about a young boy who's 8 years old, who's separated from his baby brother who was recently born, and the journey that Leon takes to find himself as well as his brother. The next set of books that I got for Christmas, I put in the category of short stories / poetry. And the first book that I got is called In the Not Quite Dark, Stories by Dana Johnson. Dana Johnson is an African-American writer who I am familiar with mostly through the stories that she's written in literary journals. And one of the things that I like about Dana Johnson as a writer is she writes about African-American contemporary lives in a way that I find doesn't ostracize any other readers. She seems to hone in on the pain that her characters are feeling or the elation that her characters are feeling. And in doing that, I feel as though she really renders the stories of her character in a way that is so beautiful. She also is a writer that I enjoy because I don't know that much about the West Coast, and the way in which she discusses LA turns LA into a person. Anybody who has watched my videos know already that I love it when a place can stand in a narration in the same way that a character can, so I'm really excited for that collection. The second collection of short stories I got is called A Scrap of Time by Fink. This is a Polish writer, and I got this book from my booktube Secret Santa, so thank you very much, Anna, for giving me this book. One of the reasons that I'm excited about this book is because this book is a translated book. It's a book that was originally written in Poland, and it's a book of stories that deals with the survivors of World War II. And though I've read a lot of narration about World War II, I've never read it from the perspective of Polish narrators, so I'm extremely excited about that. In the category of poetry and short stories, the last book that I got was Olio by Tyehimba Jess. This poet is outstanding. I love him. I would say that Tyehimba Jess is the kind of writer whose poetry can also fall into the category of historical narrative. In Olio, Tyehimba Jess imagines through his poetry the narration of American slaves, the narration of American blues writers and singers. I have only heard outstanding things about this book. We have narrations from Blind Tom, we have narrations from Mark Twain, we have narrations from Isaac Dickinson, we have narrations from A Chorus of Imagined Slaves and The the ordeals and the triumphs that they lived through. I loved his first book, Lead Belly, which was a fictionalized rendition of the blues singer Lead Belly, and so I cannot wait for this piecing together of lyricism and poetry to render the bigger picture of a time in American history that I am fascinated with. And speaking of historical fiction, the next set of books that I'm going to discuss fall in that category. The first book on my list that I was gifted this Christmas is The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. And look at this beautiful cover. This book is set in the 19th century, and it follows our protagonist Cora as she moves from London to an imaginary town set in Essex. And in the town, individuals are dying or they're being inflicted by ailments, and the people in this town believe that the reason that this is happening is because of the Essex Serpent. The Essex Serpent is a real life myth that people in the 19th century believed in, and Sarah Perry resuscitated this myth and used it as the backdrop for her novel to look at the spaces between what's scientific and what's superstition. There's also a love story in here, and so she looks at the spaces and the gaps between love and hate, and she also uses the backdrop of the Essex Serpent and its myth to look at what is friendship, the real idea of friendship, versus what is the fake idea of friendship. And I love a good historical fiction novel, and I especially love it when it's steeped in some kind of actual truth. The next historical novel that I was given this Christmas was written by Stef, and it's called Under a Pole Star. I am excited about this novel because it does all the things that I think Stef does well. We are put in a snowy landscape, and she handles snowy landscapes so well, and we are discovering a mystery. There's a death somewhere in this novel, and as far as I can tell, we follow our protagonist, Flora, who is an adventurer in the early 20th century, like in the early 1900s. And the story starts when Flora is an old woman, and she's being interviewed by a journalist who asks her about two of her companions who go on this exploration to Antarctica but do not return. And the story then takes us back in time to tell us about how Flora got on the expedition and how she met these other two individuals, one of whom she has this great love with. His Bloody Project by Graeme Macrae Burnet is the final historical fiction novel that I got, and this is also a novel that is steeped in reality. This novel is set in the Scottish Highlands in the late 19th century, and it follows the murder of three individuals, one of whom is a baby, and the individuals were murdered by a teenage boy. The writer uses this compelling backdrop as well as real artifacts from the crime to take the reader through the revelation of how and why our teenage protagonist did what he did. I'm particularly excited for this novel. There's been a lot of buzz on BookTube about it, and it was shortlisted for this year's Man Booker Prize. And I like to read historical narrative that uses real life documents or real life artifacts as the platform for which a novel can springboard off of. The next category of novels that I'm going to discuss, which I was gifted this Christmas, falls into family ties or family matters. And the first book is Home Field by Hannah Gersen. I put this book on my list because Hannah Gersen writes for the Millions, and I love reading the articles in the Millions because it always tells me what I should be reading, or it always gives great reviews on literary journals that I'm interested in. And the premise seems like one of those surface premises that, if handled really well, can render an excellent book. So the book follows Dean, a high school football coach and a beloved member of the town whose wife has recently committed suicide. And his wife has left him alone with his children, his teenage daughter and his smaller children, and he has to fumble his way through what it means to be a parent after such an act in a small town where everybody knows everything, or where everybody seems to know everything. And like I said, this isn't an unusual premise, small town or tragedy in a small town, but what it does have is the potential to be so rich and so complicated if handled well, and I trust Hannah Gersen as a writer, so I'm excited to see what she does with this family small town narrative. As Good as Gone by Larry Watson is another small town novel that deals with a grandfather taking care of his grandchildren in the wake of being an absentee father. There's so much for Larry Watson to mine here, and I'm actually not familiar with Larry Watson as a writer, but I'm excited to read about a book where somebody who was an absentee parent has to now come back and act as a parent to his grandchildren. I'm interested in the complicated layers of what it would look like if he was a great parent to his grandchildren, and what kind of resentment him just being in the picture must radiate off the children that he left behind. Commonwealth is the last family narrative that I was gifted this Christmas, and I only actually know Anne Patchett's Bel Canto, which was a wonderful experience when reading. And so I'm excited about this just because I trust the narrator. I hope that this is just as good. I know that it's drastically different than Bel Canto, and the book is supposed to follow two sets of children who are brought together when their parents marry due to an extramarital affair. I think that's right. And I heard that Anne Patchett does some excellent things with third-person perspective in this narrative, and so I'm really looking forward to what this book holds. Last book on my list is The Story of a Briefed Marriage by Anuk Arudpragasm. I hope I pronounced that right. This story follows a soldier in Sri Lanka over the period of a day, and we see how his despondency is turned to elation when he is proposed to. That's all I know about the book, but I am deeply interested in the power of positive emotion, specifically the power of love during despairing times, and a proposal during a war over the period of a day, and how it transforms an individual's outlook on life is something that I can buy into. So that is it. That is all. That is the books that I was given this Christmas. I'm so excited to read them. I know I said in my last video that I would be doing a book on my favorite audio readers. That is still to come. Keep reading, keep writing, keep reviewing, and I hope you got wonderful gifts this Christmas. Bye now.